Billionaire Richard Whitaker sat rigidly in first-class seat 2A on the overnight transatlantic flight, his jaw clenched and his temples throbbing as his 6-month-old daughter, Emma, cried with a force that felt almost impossible for such a tiny body. Her screams pierced the cabin without mercy. For 3 relentless hours, not a single passenger, first class or economy, had been spared. It was the kind of crying that seeped through noise-canceling headphones, through closed eyes, through patience itself. Richard had exhausted every option he could think of. He paced the aisle with Emma pressed against his shoulder, gently bouncing her as sweat soaked through his tailored shirt. He reheated bottles only for her to reject them with angry swats. He changed her diaper again and again, fumbling awkwardly in the cramped airplane lavatory. At one point, in pure desperation, he pressed his $900 noise-canceling headphones near her ears and played classical music, something a specialist once recommended. Nothing helped. Around him, irritation simmered. Fellow first-class passengers exchanged sharp glances and thinly veiled sighs. A flight attendant knelt beside him, offering calm suggestions that led nowhere. Even the pilot made a polite announcement about maintaining comfort for all travelers, an announcement Richard knew, without question, was meant for him. His face burned with humiliation. For the first time in years, no amount of money, power, or authority could fix his problem. Then, without warning, the impossible happened. A teenage boy emerged from the economy section and walked calmly toward seat 2A. He couldn't have been more than 16. His clothes were worn but neatly kept. A backpack hung from one shoulder, patched in several places with strips of duct tape. The contrast between first-class luxury and the boy's quiet presence was stark. Without introducing himself, without drawing attention, the teenager stopped beside Richard. He looked down at the screaming infant and gently extended his hands. "May I?" he asked softly. His voice cut through Emma's wailing in a way nothing else had. Richard barely hesitated. Exhaustion stripped away caution, status, and pride. He nodded. The moment the boy took Emma into his arms, the change was instant. The screaming stopped. Not faded, stopped. A stunned silence rippled through the aircraft. 200 passengers froze, waiting, afraid to breathe in case the miracle shattered. The teenager held Emma securely, applying gentle pressure along specific points on her back while humming a low, unfamiliar melody. His movements were calm, practiced, certain. Emma's tightly shut eyes fluttered open. Her fists relaxed. She stared up at the boy's face, studying him, then released a small, contented sound. For the first time since takeoff, she looked peaceful. Richard felt his chest tighten. "How did you do that?" he whispered. The boy smiled, barely. "My baby sister had colic. It took months to learn what actually helped." Richard looked around and saw something he never expected. Gratitude. Passengers who had glared at him earlier now watched with awe. Some smiled, others silently mouthed thank you. Then Richard noticed the boy more closely. The backpack wasn't just patched, it was covered with mathematics competition badges. A notebook stuck halfway out was filled with dense equations, symbols layered with precision and confidence. And in the boy's eyes was something unmistakable, intelligence sharpened by struggle. "Who are you?" Richard asked quietly. The teenager met his gaze, composed beyond his years. "My name is Noah Simon. I'm 16. I'm from Southside, Chicago. I'm flying to London to compete in the International Mathematics Competition Championship." The words landed heavily. Richard felt something inside him shift. The person who had calmed his daughter, who had rescued him from public humiliation, wasn't a professional caregiver or elite specialist. He was a brilliant teenager from one of the hardest neighborhoods in the country. As Noah continued holding Emma, now happily gurgling, Richard had no idea this encounter was about to unravel a story of grit, sacrifice, and genius, one that would alter both their lives. And neither of them yet understood that what followed would challenge Richard's deepest beliefs about intelligence, value, and what it truly means to help someone. Richard Whitaker was 42 years old, the CEO of Whitaker Technologies, an artificial intelligence powerhouse valued at over $8 billion. He was headed to London for board meetings that could shape the company's entire European expansion. Normally, flights were quiet work sessions, contracts, projections, satellite calls from 35,000 feet. This trip was different. His wife, Sarah, was recovering from emergency surgery. "I can cancel London," Richard had said at her hospital bedside. "Absolutely not," Sarah replied firmly. "This deal matters. Take Emma. You'll be fine." He hired the most elite nanny service in the city. The nanny canceled hours before departure with food poisoning. With no alternatives, Richard boarded the plane alone, with a baby, zero childcare experience, and a schedule packed with high-stakes meetings. The first hour lulled him into false confidence. Emma slept peacefully in her bassinet while Richard reviewed financial forecasts. Maybe Sarah was right. Then Emma woke up screaming and everything fell apart. The bottle failed, the diaper change failed, walking the aisle failed, white noise failed. The flight attendants remained professional, but concern crept into their voices. "Sometimes babies just cry," one suggested gently. "Have you tried ocean sounds?" another asked, handing him a speaker. Nothing worked. Until Noah Simon walked down the aisle. Emma's cries rose with a force that felt unreal for someone so small. Each scream sliced through the cabin, sharp and relentless. As the hours dragged on, Richard became painfully aware that the mood in first class had shifted from mild discomfort to open hostility. In seat 1A, Harold Morrison, a retired manufacturing tycoon, kept sighing loudly, glancing at his gold watch every few minutes as if timing the misery. Finally, he leaned toward his wife and muttered, just loud enough to be heard, "This is exactly why children don't belong in first class." A few rows back in 3B, socialite Victoria Sterling typed furiously on her phone, her manicured nails striking the screen with visible irritation. "Unbelievable," she said to her assistant. "If you can't control your child, you shouldn't bring them on a plane. Some people have no consideration for others." Richard felt heat rush to his face, part embarrassment, part anger. These weren't strangers. They were people from his world, powerful, privileged, influential. People who should have understood that some situations couldn't be controlled. Yet their judgment cut deeper because this was a failure Richard couldn't explain away. He was a man who negotiated billion-dollar mergers, solved complex problems daily, and commanded rooms filled with industry leaders. But here he was, utterly defeated by his own 6-month-old daughter. The hardest part wasn't the glares or the whispers. It was watching Emma suffer and having no idea how to help her. Every wail sounded desperate, as if she were asking for something he didn't know how to give. As the flight continued, Richard's worry grew beyond the cabin. 5 days of critical meetings awaited him in London. Investors, partners, boardrooms where weakness wasn't tolerated. He couldn't walk into those rooms carrying a screaming baby. If he couldn't figure this out, the entire European expansion, years in the making, could unravel. What Richard didn't realize was that 3 rows behind him in economy class, 16-year-old Noah Simon had been listening closely, his concern growing with every cry. Noah was traveling alone. Everything he owned for the trip fit inside a worn backpack, his plane ticket purchased with money raised by neighbors, teachers, and church members through bake sales and car washes. The International Mathematics Competition Championship was more than a contest. It was his shot at a full scholarship to MIT, a chance to change his family's future. Noah lived on the Southside of Chicago in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment with his mother, grandmother, and 3 younger siblings. His mother, Lisa, worked double shifts as a nurse's aide. His grandmother, Rosa, watched the children during the day. 2 years earlier, Noah's youngest sister, Maya, had suffered from severe colic, crying for hours, day and night. They couldn't afford specialists or expensive remedies, so Noah learned. He researched infant discomfort late at night, studied massage techniques, experimented with holding positions, pressure points, rhythms, anything that might help.
Slowly, through patience and trial, he figured it out. "Noah's got magic hands," his grandmother used to say proudly. "That boy can calm any baby." Now, as Emma's cries echoed through the plane, Noah recognized the sound instantly. The pitch, the rhythm, the strain. It was the same cry Maya used to make, digestive pain mixed with sensory overload. He knew he could help, but he also knew what the world often saw when it looked at him. A black teenager, alone, walking into first class. Suspicion, rejection, worse. For 2 hours, Noah wrestled with the decision. He opened his math textbook, tried to focus on formulas that represented his future. But Emma's cries grew more frantic, and guilt tightened in his chest. Finally, compassion won. Noah closed his book and stood up, ignoring the curious looks as he walked toward the divider. The flight attendant stopped him with a practiced smile that didn't quite hide her caution. "Can I help you?" she asked, already preparing to turn him back. "The baby in first class," Noah said quietly. "I think I might be able to help." She hesitated. "Are you traveling with family up there?" "No, ma'am," Noah replied respectfully, "but I've taken care of a colicky baby. I recognize the crying. Sometimes there are techniques that work." The attendant glanced toward first class where Emma's screams had reached a breaking point, then back at Noah's earnest face. "I'll ask the father," she said. But before she could move, Richard appeared in the aisle, Emma crying uncontrollably in his arms, his confidence completely gone. "I heard someone say they might help," Richard said, desperation stripping away all authority. Noah took a breath. "Sir," he said carefully, "my name is Noah Simon. I know I'm young, but my baby sister had severe colic. I learned some techniques that helped her. I think your daughter might be dealing with the same thing."
Richard looked at Noah, really looked at him for the first time. He saw intelligence in the young man's eyes, confidence in his posture, and most importantly, genuine concern for Emma's well-being. Richard was exhausted enough and desperate enough to consider help from any source. "What kind of techniques?" Richard asked, raising his voice to be heard over Emma's crying. "Gentle pressure on specific points along her spine, combined with a particular holding position that can relieve gas and digestive pressure," Noah explained professionally. "Also, sometimes babies get overstimulated by too much bouncing and movement. They need calm, steady pressure instead." Richard looked around the first-class cabin and realized that every passenger was watching this interaction with intense interest. Some looked skeptical about accepting help from a teenager, while others appeared hopeful that someone might finally bring peace to the flight. Richard made a decision that would change everything. "Please," he said, extending Emma toward Noah, "if you think you can help her, I'm willing to try anything." What happened next seemed to defy logic and medical understanding. The moment Noah's experienced hands made contact with Emma, her crying began to diminish. Noah held her in a specific position that Richard had never seen before, supporting her head and neck with one hand while applying gentle, rhythmic pressure along her spine with the other. "Babies with colic often have trapped gas and digestive discomfort," Noah explained quietly as he worked. "This position helps release the pressure while the back massage stimulates their digestive system." Emma's screaming reduced to whimpering, then to soft hiccups, then to complete silence. The entire first-class cabin watched in amazement as Noah began humming a soft, melodic tune that seemed to hypnotize the baby. Emma's eyes, which had been squeezed shut in distress, slowly opened and focused on Noah's face. "Where did you learn that song?" Richard asked, mesmerized by the transformation in his daughter. "My grandmother taught it to me," Noah replied, continuing the gentle back massage. "She said it was a lullaby her mother sang to her when she was a baby. Sometimes old songs carry a special kind of comfort." Richard watched as Emma began to relax completely in Noah's arms. Her tiny fists, which had been clenched in distress, slowly uncurled. Her breathing became deep and regular. For the first time in hours, she looked peaceful. The businessman in seat 1A, who had been complaining loudly about the disruption, now watched Noah with obvious admiration. "Remarkable," Harold Morrison said to his wife. "Absolutely remarkable." Victoria Sterling put down her phone and stared at Noah with a mixture of surprise and respect. "I've never seen anything like that," she whispered to her assistant.
The flight attendants gathered nearby, amazed by the sudden transformation in the cabin's atmosphere. "How long will she stay calm?" Richard asked Noah. "Hopefully, if she's experiencing what I think she is, she should sleep peacefully for the rest of the flight," Noah replied confidently. "The pressure on her digestive system has been relieved and she's no longer overstimulated." True to Noah's prediction, Emma's eyes began to flutter closed as she settled into peaceful sleep. As Noah gently transferred the sleeping Emma back to Richard's arms, maintaining the same supportive position, Richard found himself studying this remarkable teenager with new eyes. "Noah, you said you're traveling to London for a mathematics competition?" Richard asked quietly, not wanting to wake Emma. "Yes, sir. The International Mathematics Competition Championship. It's a global competition for high school students, and the top finishers receive full scholarships to universities like MIT, Stanford, and Cambridge." Richard was impressed. "That's incredibly competitive. You must be exceptionally gifted in mathematics." Noah shrugged modestly. "I love solving problems, whether they're mathematical equations or figuring out how to help a crying baby. To me, they're both puzzles that need the right approach." "Tell me about your background," Richard said, settling into his seat with Emma sleeping peacefully in his arms. "How did a 16-year-old from Chicago become qualified for an international mathematics competition?" Noah's eyes lit up as he shared his story, though he remained standing in the aisle, unsure if he was welcome to sit in the empty first-class seat beside Richard. "I've always been good with numbers, but my school in Southside Chicago doesn't have a strong math program. Most of my learning has been self-directed, using library books and online resources." Richard gestured for Noah to sit down, genuinely interested in hearing more. "My math teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, noticed my ability in 8th grade and started giving me extra problems to solve. When I finished the entire high school curriculum in 6 months, she helped me find online college courses." "How did you qualify for the London competition?" Richard asked. "I won the Chicago Regional Competition, then the Illinois State Championship, then the national qualifying rounds," Noah explained matter-of-factly. "Each level gets harder, but I've always been able to see patterns in mathematical problems that others miss." Richard was beginning to understand that he wasn't just talking to any teenager. He was speaking with a mathematical prodigy whose intellectual gifts were as remarkable as his ability to calm crying babies. "How is your trip to London being funded?" Richard asked. Joe's expression became more serious. "My community raised money for my plane ticket and accommodations. The barber shop on my block, the church congregation, neighbors who could barely afford their own bills. They all contributed because they believe in my potential." Richard felt a profound shift in his understanding of the young man sitting beside him. Noah wasn't just naturally gifted. He was carrying the hopes and dreams of an entire community that had invested in his success despite their own financial struggles. "What happens if you win the competition?" Richard asked. "Full scholarship to MIT with additional funding for living expenses," Noah replied, with his voice filled with quiet determination. "It would mean I could study mathematics and computer science at the highest level and eventually come back to my community to create educational programs for other kids like me." Richard realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. Not just mathematical genius, but the kind of character and vision that could change the world if given the right opportunities.
But he also understood the crushing weight Noah was carrying. One single competition would decide everything, whether Noah could chase his dreams forward or return to Chicago burdened with the painful thought that his community's faith and sacrifices had all been for nothing. As Emma slept on, calm and undisturbed, Richard felt a resolve form inside him, one that surprised even himself. "Noah, I'd like to offer you something," Richard said, his executive instincts already shaping the details. Noah's expression shifted, interested yet guarded. "What kind of offer, sir?" "I'll be in London for 5 days attending critical business meetings," Richard explained. "And as you can probably tell, I'm in no position to properly care for Emma while managing high-stakes international negotiations." He paused, studying Noah closely. "I want to hire you to look after Emma during my stay in London. I'll pay you $500 per day, arrange a hotel room connected to mine, and make sure you have reliable transportation to and from your mathematics competition." Noah froze, staring at him in disbelief. $500 a day, sir? That's more than my mother earns an entire week." "That's the standard rate for a professional nanny in London," Richard replied evenly. "And frankly, I believe you're more than capable of the responsibility."